Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast. Join Corbin and Allen, along with guest hosts, as they bring their love for the cinema to discuss films from every genre and decade. Learn about the history of the film, little-known facts, and insightful explorations while they enjoy discussing your favorite film. The curtain is rising and your podcast is starting, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your guide to the silver screen. Welcome back, listeners, to the fourth installment in our Terminator movie review series. Today we are reviewing Terminator Salvation. This is John Connor. You are the Resistance.
I'm just kidding. John Connor isn't real. This is your co-host Corbin.
And I'm Allen.
Gotta say, Christian Bale, who is John Connor in this film, yes, Nick Stahl is nowhere to be seen. He's disappeared. Maybe in an alternate timeline. We don't know.
Maybe.
But I gotta say, Christian Bale does kind of use something between a normal voice and the Batman voice.
Yeah, this came out in 2009, right? Mm-hmm. So It would have been right off of the heels of The Dark Knight, which is, at the time, one of the best, not only highest grossing superhero movies of all time, but also widely considered to be one of the best superhero movies in general. So maybe he had some inspiration.
Maybe. That is a good point. He was in the middle of the franchise, the Batman franchise. Christopher Nolan hadn't finished it up yet with The Dark Knight Rises. Yeah, I think he was really operating with that voice going on there. There's a lot of big names this time around in this movie. Christian Bale, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Worthington, who I think was probably not very well known, but little James Cameron project came out, kind of swamped this film into the time that land forgot.
Yep.
He was in that film too, that came out this year. Common's in this movie. Anton Yelchin, rest in peace. Sadly, he's passed away due to a freak accident. It was very sad.
Also got Helena Bonham Carter is in this movie. But not
That's
very
right.
much, she's a big actor, but doesn't have a very much screen time.
I wish I understood why she was in this movie. I don't know why. I mean, yeah, it has a very small role in this film. Who knows? But I wanted to call the listeners' attention to one thing real quick. There are timestamps in the description below. That's for every single episode. So if you want to jump to our ratings or jump straight to our discussion, then I definitely wanted to make sure everybody knew where to check for those timestamps, just right in the description below. And then, of course, if you do want to know what movies I'm watching on a daily basis or weekly basis, follow me at CWRiley95 on Letterboxd. That's a really great way to interact with me and just get my quick thoughts on everything that I'm seeing, and you can check on every rating that I've given and what films that I've given. Alan's not on there. Hashtag bring Alan back to Letterboxd.
I am on IMDb, and I keep that one updated pretty regularly, at least just with ratings. So I don't even know my username. I think it's just Alan Rankin.
Probably.
If you look for me, if you Google me my IMDb page, you can probably find me.
That's one feature I really wish IMDb would do, is integrate following people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's there, but it's really not a thing. So that'd be cool to be able to follow more people.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, Terminator Salvation. They dropped the 4 from the title. I think probably giving movies numbers had somewhat gone out of vogue, except Marvel brought it back right around this time.
Yep.
Because we would get Iron Man 2. Notice nothing is numbered anymore with Marvel movies. We're not getting 4 Thor. It's just Thor, Love and Thunder, or whatever.
Right.
So I do like that this is just Terminator Salvation. I think that's a good title. It was going to have a much longer title originally. It was going to be called Terminator Salvation: The Future Begins.
Yeah, I think Terminator Salvation works much better because even Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, kind of a mouthful, although it does have a much, I guess, a shorthand title of just being Terminator 3 instead of just Terminator Rise of the Machines. So,
yeah, this was going to have like a subtitle and then a subtitle, getting very cumbersome. Nevertheless, this film was a early-ish summer blockbuster release of May 21st, 2009, which is Memorial Day weekend. And it was the 23rd highest grossing film of any Memorial Day weekend.
Oh, wow.
And it should be noted that this film was released in the 25th anniversary of the original Terminator film.
That's right. Yeah, because original Terminator came out in 1984.
That's right, yeah. Which is crazy to think it takes so dang long to get Terminator sequels.
Yeah.
Getting the fourth film after 25 years. I mean, if you saw the first Terminator when you were, 25 and you watched Terminator Salvation, you'd be middle-aged.
Yeah.
If that, I mean, you'd be 50 years old.
Yeah.
It's just kind of crazy how long it takes for these movies, and that pattern has not stopped. We will talk about that in upcoming reviews.
Right.
But 2009 was a crazy, massive year for cinema, particularly because James Cameron had abandoned Terminator. He created the first two films. They are extremely beloved. Make sure to go back and listen to our thoughts on those Terminator films, because I think you might be surprised what we think.
Mm-hmm.
But James Cameron directed a little film everybody may have heard of, kind of an indie underground hit.
Yeah, sleeper hit. Yep.
A sleeper hit. Yes, Avatar grossed $2 billion at the box office, broke his own record, surpassed Titanic, which previously held the record, and just super massive. I was in the theater for Avatar with my 3D glasses on, hurting my head after 2 hours. But I was also in the theater for Terminator Salvation. But, of course, James Cameron's new independent property was a far bigger success.
Yeah. It was only recently beat out by Avengers Endgame, which some may even call a bit of a cheat because they re-released a different version of it to have, I think, a bit more footage. Either way, yeah, for the longest time, it was the number one grossing movie of all time. $2.7 billion in the box office. And also Terminator Salvation. How much did that make in the box office?
Yeah, it didn't do that well. So keep in mind, it had a $200 million budget.
And I read that it's like one of the highest budgets for an independently produced picture. Is that correct?
It probably is, because this was produced by the Halcyon Company, which went bankrupt after this movie.
Well, makes sense.
And it should be noted that the $200 million budget doesn't just cover the entire expense of this film, because you have to think about how much marketing costs, and then you also have to think about how much distribution rights cost, because Warner Brothers got distribution rights domestically, and Sony got distribution rights internationally.
Gotcha.
I heard Sony paid $100 million to distribute this internationally, and Warner Brothers paid $60 million.
Wow.
So when all is said and done, how much was sunk into the film overall, you're approaching the $500 million mark.
Yeah, definitely.
For this movie. So we're going to talk about that here more in just a second, about the incredibly high financial expectations this movie had to achieve in order to be successful economically. But with a $200 million budget, it only grossed $125 million in the United States.
Yikes. That's pretty rough.
That's rough, and that's $25 million less than last time. Overseas, it grossed $246 million, which is $37 million from last time. Not too wide of a margin there, but the one thing it did was worldwide $371 million, which was $62 million than last time. The last movie grossed $433 million. If you look at them all together, after Terminator 2, the movies have just been going downhill financially.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it sounds like, as far as, at least with Terminator 3, we also noted that the audience and critic score had also taken a big drop as well from the second movie, which was really well liked from both critics and from audiences. So let me ask, what are the scores for this?
Oh, It's going to be a gut punch.
Ugh.
So let's be positive. Let's start positive first. So right now it has an average score of 6.5 on IMDb.
Okay. Well, that is a little bit higher from last time.
Higher from the 6.3. Not a lot, but hey, there's a ray of sunshine there. Now, the Rotten Tomato scores are very surprising to me, considering our thoughts on Terminator 3. Just to refresh you, Terminator 3 had a 69% approval rating from critics, but a very low 46% from audiences.
Right.
Well, this time, only 33% of critics recommend this movie. It is considered very rotten critically.
Ooh, that is rough.
Audiences actually saw this a little better, though, because they gave it a 54%. Still not good, but hey, a majority of audiences liked the movie.
Yeah, I guess I thought it was okay at best. That is significantly worse, at least critically, from last time. Significantly worse.
It is crazy worse. And as far as critics' ratings go on Rotten Tomatoes, this is the second lowest in the franchise.
The second lowest?
Yeah, we'll get there next week.
Oh, no.
I gotta say, last week, Terminator 3 received a Metascore of 66, a shocking, generally positive reviews.
Yeah.
This week, Salvation got a 49, which means it's generally mixed reviews.
Yeah.
It's in the yellow.
So it looks like critically and audience scores are not great. Looks like audiences like it a little bit more than critics do. But when you look at it with them both combined, you get the average score. It's pretty low.
Now, the surprising thing is last week audiences gave this film a B+ through CinemaScore, which is the most accurate gauge of audiences at the time. And this week they gave it a B+ as well.
Oh, wow.
So audiences really thought they're equally good.
Yeah, that is a bit surprising how high that audience score is from the CinemaScore.
This was also two firsts in the Terminator franchise. This was the first time a Terminator film was theatrically released with a PG-13 rating.
Which I do remember caused quite a bit of controversy because for the last three movies, they've always been rated R.
Right. All of the previous installments have been rated R, which we talked about whether they really deserved R ratings or not. I thought they all could have easily been PG-13 with a couple minor edits. But nevertheless, this was PG-13. If you did go back and watch the theatrical trailer, which we'll talk about here in a minute, it did tout the R rating.
Right.
They did cut out some topless nudity that really doesn't add anything to the plot. And in the very beginning of the film, when they're infiltrating that underground base, they fight one extra robot, and then there's another extra scene where a guy gets stabbed with a screwdriver and it's a bit more violent. That's really all there is. The director's cut is available. I own it on the 2 combo pack Blu-ray set, and that is the official R-rated cut.
Right.
And that's the one I watched.
Right. I just watched the one that was on Netflix, so that would be the theatrical cut, because I didn't have any of that in mind.
Now, the other first for the Terminator franchise is this is the first time it wasn't number 1 opening weekend at the box office. This actually was number 2 at the box office.
Oof.
With a respectable $42.5 million, which is about on par with the last film. The only difference is this movie's been 5 years later, so you do have to take in a little bit of inflation. If you count the entire Memorial Day weekend, it grossed $51.9 million. I mean, for a movie with a $200 million budget and with name recognition like Terminator, it should have been a higher opening weekend, I would say, than this.
Yeah.
And especially you got Christian Bale in it.
Yeah, it's got Christian Bale in it, which, again, coming off of The Dark Knight, I would have expected Terminator Salvation to do much better in the box office than what it actually did opening weekend. It's pretty low, all things considered.
Well, it was beat out by the very family-friendly sequel, Night at the Museum: Battle for the Smithsonian, and it's over Memorial Day weekend, which I don't really understand why they chose to release it then. Kids are out of school. Families want to go see a movie.
Right.
Memorial Day is like a historical significance through holidays. Night at the Museum has a lot of that kind of historical fantasy incorporated into it. I don't know. The other thing Night at the Museum had going for it was it opened in over 600 more theaters than Terminator Salvation. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it Night at the Museum just feels like it makes a little bit more sense to come out Memorial Day because of not only just the historical significance, but also, like you said, the families that now can see a movie with all the children with the kids out of school. So, yeah, it is a strange time to release it. Maybe they were releasing it to have some kind of alternative because most everything else here is Star Trek, which is PG-13, but has already been in for a few weeks. And X-Men Origins Wolverine came out this week too, it looks like, but that was released as number 6. So maybe they were trying to go for some kind of alternative. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say.
Well, it didn't work. And I mean, the top 5 at the box office were weird. There really wasn't any contenders between Night at the Museum and Terminator. Mm-hmm. And then came Star Trek, Angels and Demons, and Dance Flick, which no one remembers that last movie.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of that at all.
No. So after a month of being in theaters, 4 weeks, it had dropped to number 8 at the box office.
Yikes.
And the film at that point domestically had only grossed $113.9 million.
Yikes.
Bad.
That's not good.
That's pretty bad numbers. At this point, it should have done way, way better. Now, they did make a couple interesting choices in who they attached to this project. We do have the same writers coming back from last time, John Brancato and Michael Ferris. They did the script again. Danny Elfman did the score for this movie.
Yeah, I noticed that in the opening credits, Danny Elfman as the composer, which is an interesting choice.
Yeah, Danny Elfman always seems to work with Tim Burton. Mm-hmm. And if you watch a Tim Burton movie, the scores always sound very similar. I don't think this score really sounded like what I would think of as a Danny Elfman score.
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Yeah, it's not your typical Danny Elfman score. Usually, like you said, when you think Danny Elfman, you think also Tim Burton because he mostly works with him. But this is nothing like what he's done before. It feels a little bit more, I guess cliche would be the word I would use, compared to some of the other scores that he's done.
Now, just to give you an overall idea of what else was playing in theaters in 2009, Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, Pixar's Up, which was actually an animated film nominated for Best Picture.
Right.
Of course, Avatar, Zombieland, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Watchmen, The Hangover, District 9, The Blind Side, 2012, which I never got to see. Alan saw it, right?
I've seen it. It's been years, though.
A strong recommend?
Not from what I remember.
I just remember that was a big deal when that movie came out. It was. At least it was to us. Fast and Furious, Public Enemies with Johnny Depp, and of course G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. So a lot of very memorable films and a lot of, I would say, films people have forgotten about from 2009.
Yes, very much so.
Directing this time, James Cameron, been busy on Avatar. We got McG. Alan, have you heard of McG?
Oh, yes. I know all about Mr. McG. He's got a
you don't seem very positive.
Yeah, he's got a very... he's a man with a very odd name and a very odd lineup of movies that he's done. He started off with Charlie's Angels.
Yeah.
And then Terminator Salvation. He also did one other that I know of, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. So I know the name McG, but of all the movies that I've heard about, they don't usually come with the highest regards.
They don't come with the highest regards, but I'm actually going to be a McG defender, I guess, because everything I've seen of his, I've actually liked.
To be fair, I also haven't seen too much of his stuff other than Terminator Salvation. I think that's really the only one that I know of that I at least have seen. So,
Didn't you and I watch The Babysitter on Netflix with a couple of our other friends?
No, I wasn't there for that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I like The Babysitter on Netflix, and I guess they're in post-production on The Babysitter too, which I'm happy about. I did like the first Charlie's Angels. It's pretty fun, even though it's super cheesy. He did We Are Marshall, which was kind of a big deal, kind of a very Disney-esque Remember the Titans type movie. This Means War, Chris Pine, Reese Witherspoon, Tom Hardy. I like that movie. And he was the producer of one of my and my fiance's favorite TV shows, teen dramas, The O.C.
Ah, yes.
Why they thought, you know what, McGee's our man for Terminator. It's the same thing like last time with the last director. It's just like, why? Why'd they pick this guy?
Yeah.
I don't know.
When I saw the name McG, Terminator Salvation, I was like, what?
Mm-hmm. I don't remember, Alan. Did you see this movie in the theater?
No, this one I didn't catch in the theater. I watched it at my uncle's house after, it wouldn't have been very long after it was put out on Blu-ray. So I know I watched it within the year of 2009, but I never did get to see it in theater.
Gotcha. So I did go see it in theater. I'm pretty sure I saw it with my dad. And then, of course, when it came out on home video, I picked up the Blu-ray. I was very excited to get that Blu-ray for that. And I watched it quite a bit in 2009, 2010. And I probably revisited it once, maybe twice in the years following. But I haven't seen this movie in a very long time.
Yeah, that's the same with me. I think the last time I watched it would have been the year that it came out, 2009. So there are really only a couple of things that I actually remembered in this movie when I was watching it. But for the most part, I'm pretty much brand new to this one.
So let's go back to 2009, and we both saw the trailers for it. Do you remember being very excited to see this movie? Or like you said, were you just like, oh, my uncle got it, I'll give it a watch?
You know, I actually don't know what my thoughts were on this movie when back in 2009. I don't remember seeing it back in the day. If I were to have gone back, now that I have seen it, and watch it for the first time in 2009, it would look interesting. It looks something that's like a mixture of, well, I guess not really a mixture of, but looks like Fallout 3, but put in a movie form. I go also with a more mainline, more Hollywood story latched onto it. So it would intrigue me. It does have a very interesting trailer, I'll say that, but seeing the movie now, I do think it gives away way too much.
I thought the same thing. I thought that it showed off some really incredible action scenes, which, as we've noted, that's really what the Terminator trailers do. It doesn't look anything like the future aesthetically we've seen in the previous films, and it does really spoil a major plot point of the movie.
Yeah.
I don't know why they did that. I can see this trailer also appealing to a younger audience, because I remember being very excited to see this movie. And you're right, it does show it's rated R at the very end.
Right.
But as we came to know, good for me, it was PG-13.
That's
so
right.
I was able to go see it in theaters, and this was my very first Terminator experience. Now, audiences didn't have to wait, what would it be, 5 years to see this movie, a very long time. They only had to wait 4, because Terminator did return to the small screen.
Oh, yeah,
it came to the Sci-Fi Channel. Yes, in 2008. None of the original cast, but the Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, once again, going with the very long titles as usual, did come to the Sci-Fi Channel 2008 with Lena Headey as Sarah Connor, who, if you watched Game of Thrones, you know who she is. She was also in 300, which came out I think it came out a little bit before this movie. She was a big deal in that. So she plays Sarah Connor, and I don't really know any of the other people. So as of this recording, I've watched the first 5 episodes, and the first season is only 8 episodes, and the series was only 31 episodes.
Gotcha. So
I would say it's pretty much on par with TV in 2008. It's okay. I think I like their ideas a lot better than what they decided to do with Terminator 3, because for those who don't know, this is an alternative to Terminator 3. This picks up very shortly after a couple years after the events of Terminator 2, and they actually time travel into the future into 2007 from 1999, and also somebody who time travels back into the past is Kyle Reese's brother. That just happened here towards the end of the season. And of course, they battle more Terminators. This John Connor is much better than Nick Stahl. He's much more in line with the Edward Furlong type. So if you're interested in getting a different take, if you didn't really like Terminator 3, then I would give this one a go. It is streaming free on IMDb TV, which is quite glitchy if you don't have an Amazon product. It works on your iPhone, okay. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to keep watching this series, and I'm going to finish it out. So once I'm done with the series, I'll give it a recommend or not as to if it's worthy to fit into the Terminator lore. But, well, starting back in 1999, which, as you'll remember, Terminator 2 came out in 91, Terminator 3 all the way in 2004. So 2 years after C2 Pictures purchased the rights, 2 Terminator film ideas were mapped out and were supposed to be developed simultaneously. Teddy Safarian was hired to write Terminator 3, and eventually he just got story credit, but David Wilson was to write Terminator 4. And before any revisions were done, Terminator 3 initially took place in 2001 and revolved around the first attacks between Skynet and humans. Terminator 4 would eventually follow immediately afterward and be centered primarily on the war briefly seen in the first 2 films. Warner Brothers gave that film the codename Project Angel. So Nick Stahl and Claire Danes were contracted to come back, and the script was in development, but Arnold's role would be limited considered he was now the governor of California.
Yes, that's right.
Now, MGM and Halcyon production companies got in a lawsuit over the rights. Then, as I already mentioned, Warner Brothers and Sony paid big bucks to be the distributors of this film. So, once again, as we can see, all these major studios had a ton of money invested, not just in the budget, but in the rights to the film. So from the outset, this film had to do massively well at the box office to make this reboot and future sequels worth it.
Mm-hmm. Which we noted didn't exactly happen.
Yes, didn't happen. They did not have the Terminator future equipment like we do, and we could see all this money was not going to pay off.
Right.
Now, while watching the special features for this movie, McG noted that Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, was a big influence on his vision for this film.
I can definitely see that.
Yes, and we have actually reviewed all of the Mad Max films, and even while I was watching it with my dad this time around, my dad's like, this feels just like Mad Max, especially when they've got that big truck with the front grill and they're busting through the city. I'm like, this is straight out of Mad Max, which I liked. I'm like, hey, go for it, right? Mm-hmm. It makes it Terminator too.
Yeah, they do. Luckily, they do spend pretty much all of their time in the future rather than mostly in modern day and then flashes to the future.
Another major influence, which I definitely saw, was Children of Men.
Yeah, I can see it.
Especially those ending battle sequences in Children of Men. Also, there are 2, as far as I can remember, 2 one-take shots in this movie, and that was a big thing with Children of Men. Mm-hmm. Apparently, the Star Wars trilogy influenced McG for this movie. I don't really see it.
Yeah, I don't really see it either.
I don't know. Now, another big controversy that didn't help this film's press was a leaked audio of Christian Bale going on a psychotic rant to the cinematographer.
I know about this. This was a meme for a while.
Yeah, I went back and listened to the audio. I couldn't remember which movie it was from. Mm-hmm. Christian Bale just went off. Yeah,
he tore into that light. Well, it was a guy on lights, wasn't it?
It was the cinematographer looking at the lights.
Okay.
And he's like, "You're the most unprofessional DP I've ever worked with." He said, "I'm not coming back on this set if you're on this set." I mean, Christian Bale comes across as the biggest jerk in the world, a complete prima donna, profanity laden, just utterly eviscerates this guy for 4 minutes straight, just won't stop. And I'm like, this guy has anger issues. So from what I understand, Christian Bale is a very great actor. He's cool on screen, but don't cross him in any little way, because he comes across as a complete diva, which is sad to say.
Right. I do remember reading that he did come out publicly and apologize. But this recording of him just ripping the guy to shreds is become kind of famous now, because it's just, it feels so, like you said, so diva.
Another thing that really mired this film's production was the Halcyon Company faced multiple lawsuits for allegedly cutting people out of contractual deals.
Really?
Yes. They got sued at least 2 or 3 times for a lot of money, which of course is why they went bankrupt after this happened. That's why you don't see any more movies from the Halcyon Company.
Gotcha. Okay.
They also went crazy with tie-ins for this movie, which is probably because they're trying to make up. They sunk a ton of money into this movie. The most expensive Terminator film ever when you factor in all of these other extra costs.
Right.
So, of course, they're going to contract. They contracted like 4 book deals and 2 comic book deals and a video game deal and a ride at Six Flags. Yeah. So we got a prequel novel, Terminator Salvation, From the Ashes, written by famed Star Wars writer Timothy Zahn. A novelization of this film was released. 2 other books were released, Cold War and Trial by Fire, a 4-issue prequel comic. Dark Horse released a 12-issue sequel comic titled Terminator Salvation, The Final Battle. Toys were released. Like I said, an official ride. And a video game tie-in came out for the Xbox 360 and PS3. Plus, there was a computer animated prequel to the video game.
Whoa. So there's a lot of merchandise with this movie.
Oh, they really went overboard. And I would say this is kind of the beginning of the end for that stuff, because you don't see video game movie tie-ins anymore.
Yeah.
Very rarely will they release a novelization. They still do sometimes. If they do, it's incredibly discreet, and it just doesn't happen very often. They really have very laid low on even toys. Yeah, I would say as well. You don't see that advertised as much anymore.
Yeah, mostly toys, from what I understand, are more of a collector's thing now. Mostly collectors go after those.
The other thing is this film is dedicated to Stan Winston.
Right. I did notice that at the very end. I think it's like with the first of the before the rolling credits.
Yeah. So they were really in his debt to all of these incredible animatronic type or puppeted creations in this film, which we'll talk a bit more about that later.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, if you haven't seen Terminator Salvation and you don't want the film spoiled for you, go ahead and click pause right now. Go ahead and watch the film and come back and click play, and we'll be ready to get into all the juicy spoiler details for the film. 2018, 14 years after Judgment Day. John Connor, now played by Christian Bale, is leading a small band within the Resistance, still located in California. In a deadly mission, which only he survives, his crew, which had the smallest cameo by Terry Crews, has stolen a signal that enables them to shut down the Skynet machines. Meanwhile, Marcus Wright, played by Sam Worthington, is alive when he shouldn't be. See, before Judgment Day, Marcus was put to death by the US government because he was a criminal and was on death row, but he sold his body to Dr. Serena Kogan, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who, just so happens, works for Cyberdyne Systems. Marcus meets a young Kyle Reese, played by Anton Yelchin. They're making their way out of LA when they meet Jane Alexander, Oscar nominee for Kramer vs. Kramer in a super limited role. I couldn't help but notice it because I just saw Kramer v. Kramer, and my dad's like, what is Jane Alexander doing in 3 minutes of this movie? So Jane Alexander and the whole crew, along with some other people, And Reese specifically is taken to Skynet Central. Earlier in the week, a hit list was intercepted by the Resistance Command, which is located on a submarine, which had Reese and Connor topping the list. Because I guess they somehow know that Reese will be John's father.
They just know everything.
I guess. Okay. After failing to free Reese, Marcus helps Resistance fighter pilot Blair Williams, played by Moon Bloodgood, back to Connor's base. But a magnetic landmine partially blows up Marcus, which revealed him to be a one-of-a-kind infiltrator Terminator model. Connor, his wife Kate, recast as Bryce Dallas Howard in a very limited role, and his second-in-command, Barnes, played by Common, are determined to destroy Marcus. But Blair realizes the good in Marcus and in a daring escape sets him free. Alas, not before John has Marcus in his crosshairs, except thankfully, Marcus convinces John he is their best hope of saving Reese from Skynet, and the bombing the Resistance is going to commence on the headquarters in the morning. Marcus successfully infiltrates Skynet, but he learns that was always the plan. Skynet used his empathetic, human qualities to lure John Connor into the Skynet to easily execute him. To make matters worse, Marcus learns the signal the Resistance hopes to use against Skynet is a trap. Defying his commands, Marcus finds John rescuing Kyle and, surprise, fighting the newly built T-800 Arnold Schwarzenegger model. After a lengthy, intense fight, John and Marcus defeat the T-800, but at great cost. John does successfully set off a nuclear explosion, utterly disseminating Skynet in the US, but he is dying from wounds inflicted from his trying fight. Marcus, still made with a human heart, offers to transfer his organ. This is Marcus's second chance. With John's successful heart transplant, he monologues, they won the battle, but Skynet's global presence is strong. They must still win the war. As credits roll.
I think one of my biggest positives of this movie is I do like how much, I guess, lore that they add to the Terminator franchise or the Terminator universe. Because in movies past, we've had a little bit of lore here and there, like flashes to the future, explanations as to what happens in the future, but we never really dive too deep into what exactly the future is like. This is the first movie in the Terminator series, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the only one where we actually spend the entire runtime in this future setting. And with that, McG does have a lot of he does add a lot of Terminator types. We get to see a couple of Terminators that have big Gatling guns latched onto them, or a really big Terminator that picks up all of the humans in a camp, then puts them into some kind of carrying crate. So I like the fact that they add on to a lot onto the Terminator lore here.
That was my biggest positive about this film that I was so happy about is I felt by Terminator 3 they had really exhausted the whole plot line. Going back in time to kill John Connor or Sarah Connor, it had been done too much. So finally we are in the future. They jump us way ahead to 2018, and we do get to see this post-apocalyptic world. And what John Connor is up to, I like that he's not the leader we really think of him as yet. He will become that.
Right.
And don't they mention something like some people say he's a prophet and others say he's just kind of crazy because he really has no proof.
Something like that.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
And I do like we get to see the T-600s and all of these other creations. And then they do humanize Skynet through Marcus, which I thought was interesting. We go back to 2003. That's where the film opens, before Judgment Day. And I thought that was a nice connection they made across that of this kind of infiltrator, empathetic Terminator. So yeah, the world building is great, I would say, in this movie.
Yeah, it does make, I feel, for a much more interesting world, because like with those references and homages to Mad Max, not Fury Road, but it does feel like that.
Close, yeah.
Yeah, to the Road Warrior, I can definitely see, where those homages and stuff are at. So I think that does add on to, I guess, engrossing the audience into this post-apocalyptic world that we have. And we kind of get to see the origins of John Connor's like absolute control and becoming the leader that we've been told about in previous movies.
And I think they did a great job with the color palette, keeping that consistent. It looks very bleak. It does give me feel like the Book of Eli. I think those movies took a lot from each other for the post-apocalyptic world. And the technology that we just mentioned with the new Skynet, like they have these motorcycles, a giant Terminator, the ships make an appearance, which we've always seen. I think this is a very logical outgrowth of where Skynet would be, because we've always had very limited, just see the Terminator robots and see the ships flying around, and it looks like they're fighting in a giant junkyard.
Right.
But this is more of a desolate wasteland, more of a, as you can tell, the world has been abandoned. So I really give them a high recommendation on their production design. And in the special features, the people were just so happy to be working on this, really gave it their all. So to those that designed the production of the film, I think they did a great job.
Yeah. And admittedly, there are some pretty cool action scenes in this movie too. There are some long ones too. Some pretty long action scenes. There's one that goes on for, it feels like 30 minutes. But I've found most of the action in this movie to be rather enjoyable. I noted that the last movie, one of my bigger problems with it was, while the action is fun, it's exhausting action. It gets to a point where there's so much of it and so much is happening, it becomes exhausting. I never really felt that with this one. I never felt exhausted when we got towards the end. I guess not nearly as much as we had, at least in the last couple of movies.
I never felt exhausted. I always felt invigorated because of how well this action was shot. And the really cool thing is, they didn't really rely on CGI as much as you may think. A lot of this is actually miniatures.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So I got to say that opening action sequence where they're landing and the satellite dishes are blowing up and it feels like a legitimate war zone. Those satellite dishes were miniatures, and they composited the helicopter on, which was a real helicopter with a blue screen behind it. And then of course CG elements. So there was a ton that went into the creation of that scene. I love the opening scene. It's fantastic action. And then that's that one shot McG was really proud of, when John Connor comes up, jumps in the helicopter, and he's taking off, and he gets hit and he crashes on his head.
Oh, yeah.
And then he starts fighting that Terminator. And I think one of the reasons the film's visual effects hold up after 11 years is because a lot of this is either motion capture work, or they built physical robots, animatronic robots that they interacted with. So usually nothing is created whole cloth out of CGI. Usually a lot of this stuff is physical.
Yeah, that's something I really do have to commend it for, is its use. I would even say it's overuse of practical effects at times, because those Terminators, the two that I mentioned that have the Gatling guns are practical. I think towards the end, they're more CGI when they're fighting the Terminator in the factory, but pretty much for the most part, there's a lot of practical effects being used here, and I was actually surprised by that. I was expecting it to be pretty much a CGI mess, like kind of what we had last time, but that ended up not really being there's a lot of CGI here, yes, but they do take their time to put in more practical effects, which I really enjoyed.
I'm honestly shocked this didn't get nominated for like sound mixing or sound editing, because when I was watching it in the theater room, the sound was some of the best I've ever heard on a home video release. I mean, it was loud, explosive, engaging. Oh, it sounded great. It didn't get any nods for sound, which I think is a missed opportunity.
Yeah, no, I can't say the same, but then again, I watched it on a small TV that's right behind me right now, so that's probably the reason why I didn't notice it.
I gotta say, definitely pick this one up if you're looking to show off your sound system, because that opening scene is awesome. One of the other things that I was really glad to see is Sarah Connor's tapes come back into play.
Yeah.
For the first time. they just disappeared after the first movie.
We see her recording them at the end of the first movie, and then they aren't brought back. They aren't even, I don't think they're mentioned at all until finally they are shown up in this movie.
It's really a smart idea to show John Connor coming back to the wisdom of his mom. And I can understand why they didn't bring them into the second film, because teenagers are, they want to be rebellious. They don't really want to listen to their parents. But John Connor holds physical proof of his mom predicting the future.
Right.
Because she's experienced it. And I liked that they had those callbacks to the previous 3 films. I don't think they overdid it, though. I think they used it sparingly enough.
Yeah, they were
while still making this its own movie.
Yeah, they were definitely sparing those callbacks. I noticed a few of them, but they again never really felt like so in your face about it, which a lot of times movies like this tend to do. They tend to say, "Remember this?" and they make sure that you see it, and it kind of gets a little bit annoying. I never really felt that with this one, which again, they're positive for me. The callbacks that they have are rather subtle and actually work with the story usually.
I do think it was a smart idea to title this film Terminator Salvation, because it works on 2 fronts. You can think of it as literally the Terminator is their salvation throughout this movie, because there's this guy who is on death row. You got to be pretty bad to be put to death by the United States government.
Right.
But he is on death row, and there is this mystery. Clearly, we know that he has been resurrected somehow, but to what purpose, we're not sure. So I think they keep that mystery under wraps pretty good throughout the film. And when it is revealed that he is this Terminator and he did achieve his mission, he did bring John Connor into Skynet, I think those are pretty good twists for a franchise that's never really had twists or real mysteries to it.
Yeah, that was the scene when he realizes that he's actually a Terminator was one of the few scenes that I actually remembered when I first watched this movie. It's when he looks down and sees, all the metal inside of him and he screams no. So that scene I did remember. But yeah, it is interesting that they kind of take the Terminators and flip it on its head, where, like you said, they have to use the Terminator as, their salvation. They need to use the Terminator is the thing that saves them at the end of the day, which is, it kind of harkens back to Terminator 2 in some ways, but this time around where you're spending more time developing the character that is the Terminator on a more human level than what we did in Terminator 2.
And this, having Sam Worthington's character be basically a cyborg, he's part man, part machine, I think this allows them to ask deeper questions than the series has ever really brought up before. And it's basically what happens when man creates something in their own image and then man experiences a fall. Just as in when man rebelled against God and there was that initial fall of creation. And then, is there a second chance for humanity? Well, is there a second chance for this cyborg machine of Marcus? So bringing up these kind of biblical images, and I mean, they're not very subtle because they quote scripture twice.
Yeah.
They talk about prayer and they thank God. I at least like that more because in the past 3 films, they're bringing up these kind of deep philosophical, theological type themes, and they don't explore them whatsoever. It's just like, it's a robot, let's have it blow stuff up.
Yeah.
At least this film is addressing some of those things.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. But yeah, you are right. It is not exactly the most subtle movie, especially when one of the first images we see is a quote of scripture with Sam Worthington, and then him being raised up on the table, but is actually more of in the shape of a cross. Is not very subtle. That this also happens later on when he's chained up. He's also more akin to the shape of a cross. So yes, I will agree with you. While I do think that they do bring up more questions, I think that the Terminator series hasn't exactly been one to go very deep with anything. The most we see is that with number 2, I felt up until this point, and even that was like it was rather surface level. I've always found these movies to be rather surface level with the questions that they ask. But you are correct. They do seem to ask more of those kinds of questions here than they have in movies past, which I do appreciate, all things considered.
And, when you come to see a Terminator movie, Terminator 2 really set the precedent of explosive, just incredible action. And that's also what people want. People want a gripping, thrilling action film, which is what they deliver here in this as well. But at least we have a redemptive character arc, which we've really not seen in the past few movies. At least the third one was an utterly pointless film that just had this very paint-by-numbers script to it, which is why I'm very surprised to see the same screenwriters did the last movie. They also did this movie, so apparently their writing improved over the years. I think probably this is as much as I could ever get or ask for out of a Terminator film, as far as it exploring character arcs through redemption and relationships. Sure, it's not subtle, but it's a Terminator movie, and usually those aren't very subtle, as we've come to see.
Right.
So, of course, every Terminator movie has to have one conundrum, and this one is, how does Skynet know Kyle Reese is John Connor's father?
Right.
Because that's kind of the crux of the film, is now they don't want to eliminate just John Connor, but Kyle Reese has been born, and so a hit list has been released, and surprise, Kyle Reese is their number one. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
If you give it a thought. Now, while watching this movie, I had the foreknowledge of all three films. I didn't even think about it. But then afterwards, I'm like, wait, when I was writing the description, I'm like, wait a minute. Why would Kyle Reese be on Skynet's, radar? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't know. It is a weird thing. It is a weird thing that Kyle Reese is on the hit list, because you're right. They wouldn't know that he would be the key for humanity to survive and eventually kill off Skynet, and save, or at least save humanity, because John Connor would still be alive. I don't know how they know that. I don't really know what the reason is for Kyle Reese to be on the hit list. It makes sense for John Connor to be on the hit list, obviously, but Kyle Reese seems like a weird choice.
It's a weird choice. It's a weird choice to bring the Jane Alexander character in this movie and have her do nothing.
Yeah. Actually, I would go as far as to say not just her character, but she's a great example of this, of characters that are here but have absolutely nothing to them. I feel the character of Marcus has probably the most character development.
Yes,
but even then, I feel it's rather surface level. They really don't go too deep with him at all. In fact, for the first half an hour of the movie, before I remembered what he was here for, I was thinking, who is this guy? Why is he keep showing up? And why is he taking up so much screen time? I don't know. I don't see any good reason for him to be here. What is his purpose? And then when I remembered that, oh, right, he was the Terminator that I remember seeing chained up, then it started to click. Oh, now I remember why he's here. But still, I don't think his character, or really anybody's character here, is very well defined.
They definitely could have added more backstory as to why in the world he was on death row.
Yeah. They give us some generic, like, oh, he murdered so many people, and it's up for the death penalty because of that. But that's really about it. That's all the explanation we get for pretty much the whole movie.
Right, and my guess is the reason they don't go too far into that is because they want us on his side.
Yeah, I guess so.
If we would have known he's some psycho Charles Manson BTK or whatever, nobody's going to root for him.
Yeah, right.
So They have to make us realize he is still a very bad person. Maybe hopefully you've seen The Green Mile. Mm-hmm. And you think he's this John Coffey type guy or the Native American guy in the beginning. Maybe you hope he is remorseful of what he's done, and he is going to, he dies, but then he does get the second chance at life. But I will agree with you, Alan. There's very little character depth to these, but at least they retain certain character elements throughout this picture, such as Marcus, this is his redemption narrative. John Connor is going to become the leader we all want him to be. So there's kind of these very basic archetypes that get you to root and be on the side of these characters.
Right, yeah, they are basic archetypes. Now, Marcus actually reminds me of Marcus from Detroit Become Human, like a lot. His name is Marcus in Detroit Become Human. He wears that trench coat. He's got the shaven head. There are some pretty major similarities between the two of them. Now, obviously, in Detroit Become Human, he has a much different character arc, but the similarities I thought were there for me.
Is Sam Worthington in that game? Does he play Marcus?
No, Marcus is played by a different guy, but they look very similar.
Okay, it's sitting on my PS4. I haven't got to it yet.
Pretty good game.
Now we know where they were influenced from.
Yeah. One of my other negatives of the movie is its editing. I think this honestly has some really poor editing to it. There are scenes that follow other scenes that have no business following that scene. We go for a couple of times some pretty major hooks in logic. I found it to be rather distracting in some points because we don't really have... It's kind of hard to follow this movie because scenes oftentimes actually, don't lead into the scene that comes after it. They just kind of seem like two random scenes that are just stuck together for some reason.
There are a couple gaps that the movie just wants you to go with, I would say. I'd say right off the bat is, well, first of all, I don't know if they really should have had the whole Marcus death row scene to be the very first scene of the movie. I don't know. I wish it was just that opening battle, but I understand they're establishing him as mostly the main character. But yeah, there's that scene where in the very beginning when John Connor and his crew are underground and they're stealing the plans and the signal. And I'd say that's almost a bit of a drop line as this whole signal setup. Which turns out to be fake. And then all of a sudden, only Connor is the one that climbs out of the hole and everybody dies underground and then everybody dies up top. And yeah, I don't know. That one does kind of feel a bit jarring how in one scene he rappels all the way down, figures out all these plans, and nobody comes back up with him. Only he comes back up and he's the only one to survive.
Right. My other thing too, the dialogue in this movie, I feel, is rather poor. There are a lot of lines in here that are just really cliche, and that's, I think, my biggest negative of this movie. Terminator Salvation just feels like a cliche mess to me, because there are so many things here that are so cliche, and they all kind of compound onto each other. And then you get scenes where we meet Blair for the first time, and then 5 minutes later, not even 5 minutes later, it's like 30 seconds later, she's being attacked, and then those guys are dead, and then we move on. And it's just random scenes that I feel are just kind of thrown in here, again, back to the editing, that either don't lead into one another or just have no reason being here.
I guess my expectations weren't very high up, considering they were very low coming out of the last movies. And I would say, as far as editing and dialogue goes, for Terminator films, I would say it's pretty much on par with the other films. While watching it, I didn't think about the editing distracting me too much. As I said, there were a few scenes where it just kind of makes quick jumps in time because they want to progress the story along. So they do kind of make those certain jumps. And as far as the dialogue goes, yeah, it's not top rate. It's not going to win any kind of scores. And of course, I feel like a lot of character moments are wasted. I guess I should say potential character moments, because you don't really find much out about these people. For instance, you just brought up the scene where Marcus and Blair, she just starts cuddling him.
Yeah.
He saved her. And it is slim pickings in the future, so we can understand that
right
a little bit. Why she gets naked in front of him in the director's cut right before that, I don't know. that's beyond me.
Yeah.
And she said, "You're a good guy." And he's like, "I'm not a good guy." And she's like, "Well, you are now." Okay, well, you're right. That's very basic writing.
Yeah.
And of course, I would have loved this movie to have gone a bit deeper. And there's a huge missed opportunity, a massive waste between John Connor and Kate Connor, his wife. What's her name? Bryce Dallas Howard has no role in this movie.
Yeah, her role, honestly, pretty much the women in this movie I just feel are just weak all the way around. Helena Bonham Carter has a very, very small role, and pretty much her whole plan is just to explain to us at the very end who Marcus really is. Bryce Dallas Howard's character, Kate, doesn't really do a whole lot. And Blair's the character of Blair just kind of shows up and is here for... I don't really know why she's here, but I feel like the women in this movie are honestly really weak characters all the way around. It's
surprising considering Sarah Connor is such a pivotal, strong female lead of at least the second film. And then we had the female Terminator in the third film, which go back and listen to our thoughts on that. I mean, they make the Blair Williams character a fighter pilot. She can't really take care of herself when it comes to those three men. She needs Marcus to save her. Mm-hmm. I do wish at least one woman would have been given somewhat of a better role. Like maybe John Connor, instead of having Common be his second in command, maybe if he would have had a woman. I don't know. It is a bit of a weird choice and that's one thing that always stuck out to me was Bryce Dallas Howard had like 3 lines and was utterly pointless. She was pregnant. Yeah. That's an interesting thing we'll probably never come back to.
I don't know why she's pregnant. I don't think it really explains why she needs to be pregnant in the story, but she is.
I don't know. And it is weak writing that they bring back Helena Bonham Carter to shorthand spoon feed the audience Marcus's role and clear up everything. It's better if characters can discover revelations on their own instead of being told everything, which is disappointing. It would have been better if Marcus would have realized he basically led John Connor and Kyle Reese into a trap and was going to upend the future as they know it. We just get that weird hologram of her and he throws a stool through the glass to do it. It's a weak moment. It really comes out of nowhere. I don't really think it makes any sense.
Yeah. I honestly don't think that I honestly don't think that Marcus's character arc really makes a whole lot of sense. I understand what they're going for, where this man who was a killer is also now a Terminator is the thing that ends up saving humanity, right? That's what they're going for. But my problem is, and I think this has mostly to do with just character development in general. So one of the things we noted in the previous movies with Terminators is that they are very human-like, but when you really dig down deep, they're not. They're cold-blooded killers because they're built to be that way. Marcus is not that way. Marcus is definitely a human who goes backwards and becomes a Terminator, not by his own volition, really. And so when he finds out later on that he is a Terminator and then he ends up fulfilling what he was supposed to do the whole time, I feel that the character moment when he realizes this is weakened because of that. I feel like there could have been a much stronger character element here than, I guess, to turn him into a Terminator and him not realize it until it's too late. He is already at a scene where he realizes that he's not really human anymore. I feel like there could have been something much stronger there
that would have made Marcus's character arc or even character struggle stronger because this is something that G talked about in the special features was free will. Just because Marcus was engineered by Skynet, he is a unique creation because he is still part man, thus he has free will. I would have liked it, as you were saying, if Marcus would have dealt more so with that struggle because he just always does the right thing. which seems to be in complete contrast to the character we're shown in the beginning, who's on death row. Now, maybe he's just trying to make as many amends as possible and really turn over a new leaf. Nevertheless, I think it would have been interesting if he would have gone bad for part of it, and he would have confirmed John Connor's suspicions, his prejudices, but then ultimately Marcus turns back to the good side. Maybe that would have been cliche as well, but at least it would have given character struggle,
right,
and would have helped us be more so on his side instead of him just always doing the right thing. I can see what you're saying with that. I think that would have made for a stronger character.
And I think this mostly has to do because we juggle two main characters. Our two main characters are John Connor and Marcus.
Yes.
I feel like Terminator Salvation would have worked way better had they dropped John Connor almost completely and gone solely with Marcus's journey, because it's trying to tell the story between these two characters. And the problem is John Connor has very little to him, I feel, already. And Marcus has a lot of potential, but they do nothing with it. They have it, the building blocks are there, but they only take it right past the foundation and just kind of stop. It just feels like had the movie focused solely on Marcus's character, I feel you would have had a much more easier time exploring that idea of free will and that idea of humanity being taken away from a man, and dive deeper into that and still have maybe some John Connor stuff over here, but having play more of a supporting role than a lead role.
And I didn't personally see the movie as split as you say it is. I personally did see this more so as Marcus's story, and he did seem to get a majority of the screen time. And John Connor, I did see him more of as a supporting character. He is still crucial to the plot, and mixing in Kyle Reese, I really did like that we finally get to see their meetup and we get to see some of these beginnings. But to me, this very does feel like Marcus's story, and I saw him more as the lead character of it. Now, of course, they probably could have handled certain things better, but as far as a Terminator film goes, I'm getting the action that I want, while at the same time, it does feel like now it's not a super deep movie. None of these movies are. I think I'm going to commend it at least for bringing up some of these things and making me think about that stuff, despite it being fairly basic. But I think what they really want you to worry about is the Terminators and stopping Skynet, and seeing this big action extravaganza, which I will say it delivers on that. I honestly didn't have those issues that you're having. I can see what you're saying, and of course it could have definitely been bolstered and made much stronger, but I think the creators were far more interested in making sure the animatronics and the set design looked cool, because they're trying to make a Mad Max movie with robots. And those Mad Max movies aren't deep at all.
Right.
But I didn't have as many of those issues, I'll say. So as far as storytelling goes, I find this one to be quite different and at least more entertaining than the other ones, because the other ones felt like a partial Michael Myers stalker horror film or just a big shoot 'em up between cool looking robots. So as far as the story arc goes between the characters, John Connor doesn't have much of one because we focused on them so much. We do get to see him become the leader of the resistance because the whole command is taking out. But I think this calls back to Sarah Connor's final lines in Terminator 2, is that if a Terminator can learn to work with humanity, then she has hope for humanity itself. And that's probably the biggest thing of this movie is hope. Marcus has his redemption. He says, "Do you believe in second chances?" And that's what they all get in this movie, is a second chance at fighting the machines, whereas Terminator 3 ended on the world being nuked.
Right.
And this desolate ending. This ends on that hopeful comeback type ending.
Right.
Alan, what is your rating and recommendation for Terminator Salvation?
In some ways, Terminator Salvation finally delivers something that I guess you and I both have kind of been wanting. I guess a more fleshed out story that deals with different things. We have been on rinse and repeat for the last 3 movies. And at least we get something much different this time. Now we're spending pretty much the entirety of the movie in the future after Skynet has already assumed control. So that part's great, all things considered. My problem is this is not nearly as cohesive of a story because of its technical elements than before. Its editing, I feel, is really bad and really distracting for me because there are scenes that are adjacent to one another, but have no reason being adjacent to one another. There's no lead-in from one scene to the next. Again, the dialogue and the characters are really weak here. I feel that there are a lot of things that they completely missed out on that I feel could have been explored and talked about some more. So at the end of the day, while it has a lot of fun action sequences, and the only reason why I ever go back to watch this is probably for the action sequences, but even then, I don't really see myself doing that anytime in the future because, again, I'm not the biggest fan of the Terminator series. So I find it better than 3 when you look at it from a general sense. But that's about as far as I'm willing to go with it. So 5 out of 10, mild not recommend.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting that. Terminator Salvation is this franchise's saving grace, touting jaw-dropping visual effects, many of which are real, and an investing storyline that not only pays tribute, but neatly ties back into the original trilogy. I'm eager for the sequel. Sadly, due to a myriad of issues, the chief of which is low financial returns, we never got a sequel. But this does, for the most part, act as a decent enough conclusion to the series and a standalone film itself. I'm shocked why so many people didn't like it or view it as mediocre. My main guess is it's coming off the heels of the poorly remembered Terminator 3 and has to live in the nostalgia shadow of T1 and T2. It's been about 10 years since I've seen this movie, so there's some but little influencing nostalgia associated with this film for me. Of the 4 so far, this is the best Terminator film. I loved it. Terminator Salvation receives 8 stars out of 10 with a strong recommend.
Oh, wow. I'm actually surprised.
I loved this movie. Now, I will agree with you, Alan. This film could have been stronger in so many ways. I didn't have as many technical problems as you did as far as like the editing goes. I honestly didn't have any problem really with that following the story. There is a couple of those time jumps like I mentioned in the beginning where all of a sudden John Connor's out of the hole and everybody dies, I guess. That just kind of left me scratching my head a little bit. But the movie does move on quick enough that it really doesn't bring it up into much of an issue. Of course, side characters could have been much stronger. There's pretty much no character to anybody in the show except a little bit of Kyle Reese, mostly Marcus, and I think Christian Bale's probably the best John Connor we've gotten. What?
Can't agree with that one.
Okay. All right. Anyways, this is a really poor franchise in general. We would say. I mean, there's you talk about no cohesion in this movie. There's no cohesion between the films.
Yeah, I know I've heard that from, I think it was either 3 or this one. One of the two is where things just kind of go off the deep end for the Terminator franchise. I'm kind of feeling that. The first 2 I felt worked together much better than the other 2 that we've had so far. So I guess we'll see what happens next week. I'm going to be honest with you, from what we've had the last couple of weeks, actually from this entire retrospective, I am not very excited for next week. I have seen Genesis. It has been a while, I'll say that. From what I remember, I don't remember being too big of a fan of it. We'll see if my thoughts change. But I am just not a fan of the Terminator franchise at all.
Yeah, so far I'm not a fan of the franchise. I'm a fan of this film, and I like that we get a opening readout, which made me think of Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, Same.
Where it kind of explains it. But it's a really good opening readout that catches you up with the film. And for the most part, this is a standalone movie, although it does set it up for the end, which makes me so sad. I think this could have been a really good cohesive trilogy. And yes, this was supposed to be the beginning of a new trilogy. So the Halcyon Company filed for bankruptcy and the rights went up for grabs. The company tried to auction off the rights, hoping to get $70 million out of it. But at the time, only Joss Whedon offered to buy the rights for $10,000.
Wow.
Yeah, you can tell nobody wanted to touch this property until a hedge fund named Pacifor bought the rights for $29.5 million. And then supposedly in August 2010, an animated reboot was in the works to be titled Terminator 3000. And the hedge fund is like, no, you can't do this. You don't have the rights. So in February 2011, Universal floated the idea of having Arnold come back and having the Fast Five director Justin Lin direct. As we know, that didn't happen. So in May 2011, Annapurna Pictures won the rights because Pacifor auctioned them off. They won the rights to make at least 2 more Terminator movies, and they got those rights for about $20 million. And then finally, shooting began for Terminator Genesis on April 2014.
Wow. So the Terminator franchise has been all around the block.
Yeah, after this movie, it kind of became the ugly redheaded stepchild nobody wanted to associate with. Which I gotta say, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you just say that in many ways this was better than Terminator 3?
Yes.
And that's the thing that really blows my mind, is that Terminator 3 was so well received. And they're like, oh man, this is actually a pretty good movie. And then when Terminator Salvation came out, they're like, ugh, my gosh, what direct did they just drag this gutter up from? And I'm like, I don't see that. And I think that's why the IMDb rating now reflects this as a higher received film than Terminator 3, although not by much. I think that's the one good thing about IMDb, is it can kind of course correct when at the time when films have come out. There was actually going to be an alternate ending to this film. Maybe you would have liked it better. Maybe it would have given a recommend for you.
Okay.
It's a very fascinating alternate ending. So according to an interview from Entertainment Weekly, the studio did sign off on this end. It was in the script. McG was going to do it. Christian Bale loved this ending. He wanted to do it so bad. But then everybody thought, this might actually be a really bad idea if we do this end. So in the end of the movie, John Connor dies.
Okay.
And I gotta say, the end of this movie, we didn't really talk about it. The whole heart transplant thing is pretty sappy and like a direct callback to the very beginning.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, you can't perform heart surgery like right there. And
what are you talking about? Yes, you can.
And he's like, what's going on here? I'm like, that's a major thing, and your body could potentially reject that organ. This is movie world. As you say, everything is pretty shorthand in this movie. It's fine. It works out.
Yeah.
That's how heart surgeries work. Anyways, in the original ending, John Connor dies. But Marcus offers to somehow graft Connor's body onto his living body, so Connor would live on, but as part Terminator, I guess. So once the procedure is done, his wife, Kate, Kyle Reese, and the other major characters come into the operating room or whatever because they think John's all right. But surprise, John's eyes flicker red and he shoots them all dead. And cut to credits. That's the end of Terminator Salvation.
That is an interesting ending.
It's a gutsy ending.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, this is going to be the darkest ending of any summer blockbuster ever. And how's that going to like... And McGee's like, all right, we probably shouldn't do it. But Christian Bale was like, please, I want this to be the end. But it would be crazy if Kyle Reese died, because then they'd have a whole mess on their hands.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't even matter because John Connor dies as well.
That's true. Yeah.
So I don't know where they'd go from there. And I think this would probably earn a negative reaction from mass market audiences, but I think a lot of people would actually see this as a really gutsy ending. And that's what McGee said. McGee said maybe a few years after this movie would have been made, people would have been more okay with a dark ending. Avengers Infinity War has everybody dying in the end. Spoiler alert. But I don't know, Alan, what do you think of that ending?
It is a gutsy ending. I guess it's kind of hard to say. I'd have to see how they pull it off to see if it would work better than the ending that we have. I do like how different they're going with that ending that they had a concept for, where they do have John Connor end up becoming a bad guy. I like that. I kind of like the idea. I would like to see how they execute it though, inside the movie, because I guess with that it'd be all by execution. It is interesting. I do like that different ending though.
Well, next week we will be coming back with Terminator Genesis. Alan said he's seen it once. He gave me his short review of it, and I'm like, okay, I got to see this movie. Neither of us saw it at the theater. I know I wasn't excited to see this movie like I was for Salvation. Mm-hmm. A lot happens in 5 years. I was 19. I had just graduated high school. I was entering college. Very different from my 14-year-old attitudes. I was not interested in Terminator Genesis. I'm like, this looks pretty cheap and mediocre. So I don't know. Maybe I had a wildly different reaction to Alan when I first saw it. I'm curious to see if our reactions have changed, because this movie came out in 2015. The movie's 5 years old already.
Man.
Yeah. So it's been a while, so maybe our reactions will be completely different, especially we'll be putting our SSG goggles on to see what we think. I don't know. But regardless, I'm kind of excited. I'm more excited than I was when this film was theatrically released.
Right. I don't know. Like I said, not really too excited to continue on with this series, with the Terminator series. I'm really not too much into it. But I do want to see how much my thoughts have changed going into Genesis. Now that it has been, I guess, 5 years since I watched it. Wow.
I will say I'm far more excited for Terminator Dark Fate, because that skips all of these movies.
Right.
Yeah. And then it's a direct sequel to Terminator 2. Linda Hamilton's back. Mm-hmm. I'm very excited to see that movie, actually, and see what they do with that. And I know James Cameron is back for the first time in like 30 plus years. It's crazy. Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to share this with your friends and family. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure to do that so you'll make sure to see our review for next week. Alan, thanks for joining me.
Sure thing.
All right, we'll be back with Terminator Genesis. Hey listeners, it's Corbin. Don't forget to check out the exciting links in the description below that will connect you with more great movie reviews for your listening pleasure, and our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter page, and of course our official website where you can read great articles and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Also, if you want exclusive bonus content such as extra movie reviews, movie commentaries, and our thoughts on the latest movie news and trailers, plus more, then check out our Patreon page. It's a great way to help keep this show free, and it gives you great content that's yours to keep. All of that and more is found in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe whether you're on YouTube, Apple, Google, or Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. And while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review so other movie lovers can more easily find our podcast. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. So don't forget to share with your friends and family, and we'll see you next week, listeners. The Silver Screen Guide podcast is edited and produced by Allen and Corbin. Intro and outro music is created by Thomas Rankin. The thoughts and opinions herein expressed are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent those held by Silver Screen Guide. Silver Screen Guide is not affiliated with any company or individual involved with the creation of this movie or TV show. No portion of the podcast may be used without express written permission from Silver Screen Guide.